Okay, turning our attention back to the controversial issue of gay marriage now, with a new governor poised to take the reins at the Capitol and at least 11 new faces in the state Senate about to be sworn in, advocates are planning a new push for the same-sex marriage bill that failed in a 24-38 vote last December. They succeeded in ousting 2 senators who had voted no at that time, but will that be enough? Here to tackle that question is Ross Levi. He is the executive director for the Empire State Pride Agenda. Thanks very much for your time, Ross.
Good to be with you, Liz.
Okay, so you believe actually that you're in a stronger position now than you were a year ago, almost a year to the day. Why is that?
Well, as you alluded to, one reason is we just come out of the elections up 2 votes from where the vote happened last time, so that's already a good place to start. But I think even more significant is the way those victories were achieved. We did what you know in Albany is close to the impossible and unseated 2 incumbent senators, decades-long incumbents, one from each party, one from upstate, one from downstate, who have been against our issues for a long time. And so I think legislators have to look around and say to themselves, do I want the strength of the LGBT community coming towards me in a negative way if I should do the wrong thing on LGBT equality issues like marriage equality?
Let's talk for a second about, before we go on, about one of those incumbents. One of them was Frank Padovan. He's a Republican from Queens. He was replaced by Tony Avella, who's been on the show, so viewers are familiar with him, and he is definitely a yes. That is a Democrat, of course. And the other is Bill Stukowski. He was a Democrat replaced by Tim Kennedy, correct? And he is also a yes that's out in the Buffalo area.
That's correct.
All right. The problem, though, is that the Republicans all voted no. And the assumption last time around was that once you got to a certain point, the Republicans would maybe cross the aisle. But they didn't want to be the deciding votes. And that's why they all sat on their hands. So why would this time be any different?
Well, first of all, I think there are people that voted last time that will vote differently this time for a whole host of reasons. People voted that way last time because of a lot of dynamics. But I think most importantly, there's a new political calculus that people are looking at. I mentioned one, which is they have seen what happens when our community turns our attention to somebody who's done the wrong thing in our issues. I also think the statewide elections had a very important role to play here, too. We have a new, strong governor who has been fully in support of LGBT issues from the beginning of his campaign. He's joined by other statewide that are in the same exact position. And when you compare that, for example, to Carl Palladino, who many feel the tide turned on his campaign the moment he went after the LGBT community, that tells elected officials that if they have any ambitions for higher office here in New York State, that you can't be seen as LGBT. So I think these are a lot of dynamics that come together that tell us that this isn't as simple as just looking at what people did last time.
Okay, let's talk about Andrew Cuomo then, because there was initially there was some criticism, actually, a story in the New York Times in particular. You and I spoke about it actually on the show, about perhaps he wasn't as strong as he might have been, particularly for people who are advocates in the LGBT community. You defended him. He said that gay marriage would be a priority for him in the first year. Have you spoken to him since the election, in which you did endorse him in the end?
Absolutely. We've talked, and he has repeatedly talked about his commitment to this issue. I think the fact that almost every time I heard him speak, including when he didn't know I was hearing him speak, throughout the election, he mentioned this issue. As a matter of fact, very often it was his biggest applause line. On election night, we saw that happen. So I think for a whole host of reasons, he is really committed to this issue, and I think will be a very important ally in the fight.
Has he said to you that he would send up a governor's program bill? Or, because that's what David Paterson did. And in fact, David Paterson reignited this argument, really arguably, by staking himself and his claim to it and sending the bill to the Senate and forcing the issue in that chamber.
We haven't talked specifics about the mechanics yet. It's a little premature to that. Everybody's just sort of getting into town and figuring out what's going on. But we are very optimistic that he is going to be very receptive to whatever it is we need to do to make sure that this can become law.
There are some senators who have said that they don't think that this is going to make it back to the floor. And really, I mean, let's be honest, the Republicans, and I know you're going to say Dean Skelos, who is sort of the majority leader in waiting, has made it clear that he thinks it should come back to the floor. He would bring it back to the conference at any rate and allow them to make a decision for an up and down vote. He said last time everyone should vote their conscience. The problem is that the Republicans are probably going to have a very tenuous hold on the majority. 2012 is a presidential election year that brings out a lot of Democrats. If they have any dream of holding on to that majority, they're not going to want to touch something this controversial.
I actually don't think that's true. I think they are aware, both sides of the aisle, I think, are aware that this issue is not going away. Our community is not going away. They have seen the strength of our community and the role that we play in elections. They know that New Yorkers believe in equality. They also must know that the latest New York Times CNN poll from this spring showed that 58% of New Yorkers want marriage equality here in New York. They also have to be aware of the money that the state is losing in these tough economic times. One reports that $148 million is flowing to other states that we should be getting here by allowing marriage equality in a state where tourism and hospitality is so important. So I think, in fact, people are going to be looking and saying, this is going to be an issue going into the next election cycle. We're going to have to deal with it one way or another. And I think they know New Yorkers are going to look and not be happy if, in fact, this issue fails or is stalled.
And we should also note that a Siena poll, which actually just came out, says that making same-sex marriage legal in New York, New Yorkers support it 56%, 43%, with 1% undecided. So it's about the same as the poll that you were just referencing. You know, you also just mentioned that report, the report about the lost the revenue. It's a New York City Comptroller's report, I think, from '07. That's not a new argument, but is that an argument that you're going to start pushing harder, particularly as we see Andrew Cuomo grappling with the budget and saying that's probably going to be his first priority, is closing that $9 to $10 billion budget gap?
Yes, I think it's going to be very important for policymakers and lawmakers to hear about this piece. As you alluded to, the facts have been out there, but I'm not sure it's been highlighted in the right way. And I think most importantly, we're going to need business leaders to speak for themselves and talk about this as an issue. Because I think in these times when we need every tool we can have to help New York's economy and create jobs, to give away an economic development tool that can create $140 million annually seems like a bad move, particularly on an issue that really helps New Yorkers, is a life and death issue for LGBT people trying to take care of themselves and their families, and one that already shares public support here in the state.
Just briefly, because we're almost out of time, this is not the only issue, of course, that you are pushing. There's also another issue, and it's gender. Can you briefly just explain what that is? Absolutely.
It's a basic civil rights law for New York State, as 13 other states in the District of Columbia have done, to say that it is illegal in New York State to fire somebody from their job, kick them out of their apartment, deny them service in a restaurant simply because of their gender identity and expression. This mainly affects transgender New Yorkers who are facing horrific discrimination on a regular basis. The private sector has already been leading in this area, and many, many businesses already prohibit this kind of discrimination. We need a statewide law to make that uniform across the state.
Okay, and also just like same-sex marriage, GENDA, which stands for the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act, which is sort of a mouthful, has passed 3 times in the Assembly in a bipartisan vote. So we're going to keep an eye on that, too. In the meantime, I want to thank you, Ross Levi, for joining us.
Thank you. Happy New Year.